Hello, everyone. Today we're jumping into a somewhat more relative to the other things we've done, slightly more nebulous topic, one that doesn't have a really clean, um, uh, let me say, partner in the English language and probably most languages. Um, and so it's something that takes a longer time for us learners to pick up. And just before we start, I want to tell you personally, even though I had been studying and using Japanese for years, this was probably one of the last things that I felt comfortable using out of everything. Grammar easier than this, grammar harder than this. This is less a grammar structure. The structure itself is very easy. It's very simple to structure a sentence using this. But actually getting a good feel for it is much more difficult. So hopefully we'll get you a step closer to that goal today. And if you don't feel like you have a good, grasp on it at the end, just think that this is something that will take time and more importantly, exposure to both using it and hearing it. And when you start to hear this, you're going to start to try and map it back to what we learned and say, oh, this is why they're saying it. This is the inherent meaning in it. So let's jump in. This first panel is a bit over the top. We haven't been completely emotionless, but what it means is that we have been more straight up stating things. And as I've hinted at before in Japanese, it's there's so many different mechanisms that we have to soften or strengthen things, in the Japanese language and in its grammar structures. This isn't just politeness levels, which do the same thing. There's word choice sometimes, but there's also the way that you present information. And, it sits by itself. It can either come as there's actually a few different ways it can come in, but typically you're going to see it. It's often a sentence ender, and it will have either the des or the da following it. And so in today's lesson, we're going to focus on the des. We'll probably see some das in there as well. And I'm going to really quickly explain how we use it in terms of the structure and then jump right into the examples because that's the best way for us to get a feel for how to use it. So the thing with is that it doesn't have a meaning. You can't pinpoint a word in the sentence in the translation, whether it's English, German, or whatever, presumably other languages, and say this is where the is attaching to. It's this. It doesn't work that way. It has a purpose though, has a very very clear purpose. It is used for, and I believe the lesson title at the beginning of this is explanations. In other words, is used to explain the reason for whatever's coming after this sentence. And so it's often hard to look at this just by itself and say, oh, this is a sentence that means this. This one requires the idea of having, knowledge of what's coming next in order to say, oh, this is why it's being said. And at the same time, you'll see this in the examples, it can help soften the content of a sentence. And this is really, this is really important in Japanese because often we don't want to surprise the listener with what we're about to say. We don't want to just dump something on them in the same way that, as we've touched on before, and we'll get into more, even when we talk about wanting other people to do things, asking people to do things. There's 1,000 different ways of saying, please do this, or I'd like for you to do this, or please allow me to do this. Different ways of requesting things by softening your actual request. So let's jump into the actual structure, before we talk about it a bit more. So it comes after casual sentences. Basically any casual sentence, and when I say casual, I'm talking about those short forms. You can add the ndes after that. If you'll hold on for just 1 second. Sorry about that. So if you've got a verb, a casual verbs, that would be anything. It doesn't have to be dictionary verb. It can be past tense, so I'm just going to throw these out real fast. If we've got our go-to verb we use all the time, taberu. We could see this come forward. We could see tabeta. We could see, tabeteru, tabenai. These would all work. These are all casual forms of the verb, not restricted to the dictionary form, which we do see often. With the e adjectives, we're just going to drop those in there. Just drop the e adjective in, no change. The na adjective is almost treating the n as a noun. Now it's not, but you can think of it that way. N for noun, in that, when you have a na adjective, you need that na between it and the noun. Genki na hito. And so this na works in the same way. You need it in there. Interestingly enough, with nouns as well, you also need the na. You can't have, and I'm wondering if this is actually because of speaking. I don't have proof of this. This is just a hunch. But if we were to take a noun and let's say curry, because I try mixing curry in every single lesson I teach. If we say curry, try saying this to yourself. Try saying this, and it's not the easiest thing to say. Kare desu. You kind of karen desu. It's in there. It's a bit strange, but that na makes it so easy to say. Kare nan desu. We already have that. We're used to saying nan, and so in my head canon, that na is in there just to make it easier to say. But who knows? But this is all there is to constructing it. So let's look at some examples. I just mentioned some of these to you, but if we had aru, we were talking about something happening or talking about, there's a problem, mondai ga arun desu. We'd have it like this. If we're talking about, if I was, for example, I've had to cancel these events in the past because of migraines. And if I'd given you the explanation in Japanese saying, I have a headache, I won't be able to do today's lesson, this would fit. I'd say, atama ga itai desu. And so as you can see, the e adjective is just globbing right there onto the n. Jouzu nan desu, you got that na in there. And then also yasumi is a noun, and we have that na in there as well. So here's the big question. Here's the thing that's going to, if you're like me at all, it's going to make your brain melt a little bit. And again, I'm going to say it's going to take time for this to really sink in. And if I might suggest an approach, I would focus on comprehension of understanding it when it's presented to you first, and then work on using it yourself later on. By listening to it, you tend to hear, native input, whether it's manga or TV show or radio or whatever. And it's going to be accurate examples. And in Renshu's library as well. And then once you get a better feel for, I see when these are being used, you'll be able to use them more easily. Now, fortunately, at the end of today's lesson, we're going to talk about one specific usage that is very easy to pick up immediately. It's a very fixed way to use it, and it's great. I use it all the time. It's very effective, but we'll get to that soon. So let's take a look at, this sentence. Now, here, we've learned this. We know how to say this. If we want to say there's a test tomorrow, we could say, ashita testo ga arimasu. And all we're doing is taking that fact and dropping it out on the table. We're not doing anything with it. We're not implying anything. We're not saying that this fact is related with anything else. We're just saying there's a test tomorrow. However, how often do you say that? How often do we just say, hey, fact, and then I'm finished? It's not particularly common. Often we are taking a sentence and we're saying it as an explanation for something else. We don't speak in single sentences, we speak in conversation. And let's say that there's a party tonight. It's a curry eating party, just tons of types of curry. And, someone invites you and you say, well, I can't go. So you need, an explanation. You need to say why. I can't go. and someone might invite you, and this might be your response. You might say something like, ごめんね、行けないよ. I can't go. And then either before that or after, you could drop this in. You could say, 明日テストがあるんです. I've got a test tomorrow. Just by dropping that in there, we're saying, hey, this sentence, I am presenting this information to explain something else. It is being added for the benefit of something I just said, or more often, something I'm about to say. So, with this sentence I just put up, let me rewrite it a bit to show you the other direction. You might say something like this. So let's go back and say, someone that asks you to their curry party, and you could say this. 明日テストがあるんです. ごめんね. I've got an exam tomorrow, or I've got a test tomorrow. I'm sorry. And this would be a perfectly good way to use it. If you were to drop that in and just say 明日テストがある. ごめんね. It would make sense to the other person. No, I don't think any Japanese person or Japanese speaker would look at you and say, "Wait, what are you trying to say?" But this adds a very natural, it's a bit of glue between what you're saying and why you're saying it. So it's very, very useful in that fact. So let's jump to the next example. We talked about itai before. I'm sorry, and before that, I forgot to mention this, but you can also feel that there's a bit of emotion built into this. Like if you're giving a negative reason, um, then there tends to be, well, this is not a good thing. I kind of feel bad about that, or I'm sad about it. Um, is it formal sentences? Yes, absolutely. In fact, we'll get to some examples. I wouldn't say formal so much, but polite. I think that's what you're going for. Absolutely. You can absolutely use this. In fact, I'm just gonna just guess and say it's used as much, it's used in both equally. I don't think it doesn't feel to me like it's more polite or more casual. But good question. All right, sorry, back to the head hurting. Fortunately, this hasn't been the case lately, so maybe this will be something I can talk about fondly as a past event. But as many of you know, I suffer from migraines, and so this would be something I would say often. So instead of just saying, atama ga itai, this is just saying, my head hurts. But if I want to say this is, for example, maybe when my head hurts, I can get snappy. I'm tired, my head hurts, and so if my wife or my kids are asking me something, I might not respond to them with the, you know, level of affection and kindness that they deserve. And I might say, "Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I've got a headache." And so I wouldn't actually say in Japanese, "I've got a headache, so that's why I was being snappy." I would just say, "I'm sorry, I've got a headache." And by dropping that in there, you're saying, I'm saying this, and this is the explanation for why that happened. Or in other cases, why whatever it is I'm going to say next. So it is extremely useful. Now, we've gone through a couple of negative examples. With though, it's not restricted to that. There's no positive or negative tonal charge attached to it. So let's look at some positive ones as well. So let's look at this first one. This is not something you would say to yourself, of course. You might say this to someone else. So this might be something that there's a bit of meta in here. But let's say you're all studying Japanese. Presumably, you all have a goal to use Japanese, either to work here, live here, talk with Japanese people, absorb Japanese media, whatever. And you might be remarking to someone that you were able to do one of those things. It's like, I got a job in Japan, you say one day. And this other person, who maybe it's your mother, father, or friend, but they also happen to speak Japanese, um, they might respond this way. You know, they would tell you, "Oh, Nihongo ga jouzu nan desu ne," or "desu," or whatever. And this would be, in a sense, saying, it's because you're good at Japanese. You're good at Japanese, and then kind of in parentheses, and that's why this thing happened. We have this explanation going on. Again, it's dropping it in for the explanation. Now we're going to see some examples later, um, where the explanation is not explicit, or excuse me, not the explanation. Whatever this is explaining is not explicitly said. And that's where it can kind of get fuzzy sometimes. But hold on to that. Just if you see it, you say, this is being said for a purpose. Something before, something after, the is in there. And I feel I'm saying with too much emphasis, but it's very hard to say single characters naturally, but also when you're explaining them. In the same way that when you try to explain something to someone, you say, you need to go to the store, and you overemphasize things. It's just something we all do. And I feel like that happens to me as well. One more example. Someone says, hey, you're just a kid. You're a punk walking around in the middle of the day. And someone's like, that kid's up to no good. I'm going to go give him a talking to. They go and talk to you. This would never happen in Japan, but let's say it did. And they came up to you and they said, hey, kid, what are you doing in this park? Today's a school day, right? And after you brush aside the shock of a random person asking you that, you might say, 今日は休みなんです. Today's a holiday. Now note, there's not a clean link between the clause before, the clause after, the sentence before. There's not that kara or node where we're saying, okay, these are tightly linked together. You're just saying this, and it's explaining something else. And again, with all these, and let me jump back real fast. So I think we've stuck so far. We've got aru, we've got itai, jozu, yasumi. This is all present or non-past tenses. However, there's absolutely no restriction, because think about it. When you explain something, when you give information for an explanation, you could be talking about, well, there's a test tomorrow, so I can't go today. You could be saying there was a test yesterday, so I'm tired. You could be saying there's a test right now, so shut up. I need to take the test. There's no restriction on tense. There's no restriction on positive or negative. Casual is only in the formation. And you're starting to see this more and more, I feel, in that you see the casual form or the short form being used inside of grammar structures. The thing to remember, I've mentioned this before, is that the politeness level of the sentence is defined by the end. Whatever comes at the very end. Here we've got des, we're speaking in a polite form. And so remember, we could not, for example, let me give you, and I'm ready for everyone to put the little Kalchan X next to this. The da would make it casual. Exactly. So you could not, what was it? I can't remember what the first sentence. But let's say we had shikoto ga aru desu. I have work. We could not, no matter how much you wanted to, we could not do this. Not only does it sound really funny, it's a lot harder to say, but we can't do that. It must take the short form. However, like the person just above me posted, the way we would, casualize this or make it, casual is just by the ending. They both take the short form before the casual form. It's the ending that sets it up for you. Arun des or arun da. All right, a few more examples. Sorry, let me. I've got you. You don't know this, but I've actually got two screens of Renshu back and forth, and I have to keep track of both of them as I do this. Okay, so just a few more examples. Here are some different forms. So look, here we have the Thai form. I want to do something. So hey, why are you studying Japanese? Well, I want to go to Japan. 日本に行きたいんです。This might be something you might say this if you're feeling a little adventurous during, for example, an interview for a job in Japan. You're in another country and they're like, "Well, why do you want to work here?" And you say, "日本に行きたいんです." Now that might sound a bit too casual for a business interview, but still, you can use this as an explanation for why you're doing something else, why you're studying, why you're taking this exam, why you're applying for this job. It doesn't matter. We can jump over and do, past tense, you know, and someone said, "Oh, wow, you're going to the concert. Why?" They don't even have to say why. They're saying, "Oh, wow, you're going to the concert." Maybe they're showing you some surprise because usually you're not a concert person. Or usually everyone else goes to the concert, but you say, "Screw that. It's too expensive." So you're known as the person that, just doesn't want to spend that much money on concerts. But all of a sudden you've got tickets in your hand. And your friend says, "Wow, oh, you're going?" And they're like, "Yeah, yeah. Kipu ga yasukattan." This is past tense. The tickets were cheap. You bought them yesterday, a week ago, whatever. Past tense, works as well. And then, of course, you can use the negative form in front of it. We've done positive forms up until now. Not positive as in good, but positive as in, taberu versus tabenai. We can also use the negative form of any of these. And, this one happens to be a not adjective. But remember, when we take something, we make it negative. So, for example, verbs I'll put to the side. But if we say kawaikunai or himajanai, or hopefully this isn't something you need to use, but ningen janai, what have we said about that last E? How do we treat these words or these formations conjugation wise? Even though these are the negative forms, if we see the E, what have we said about the E before in the past? What's another way to think of these grammatically? Now, I feel like my question was worded badly, so I'll go ahead and jump in with the answer. We've always said that these nai things are treated as E adjectives. The things that end in E, nai, for example, kawaikunai, himajanai, ningen-janai, we can kind of think of them as E adjectives. So anywhere we can drop an E adjective, we can typically put these in there as well. And so this is also the case. Ima wa hima janai no desu. Now, you might be thinking, there's something different here. There's this no instead of No is slightly more formal. I'm not going to say slightly more formal. It is more formal. So you hear, generally, I would say this. Now, these are not clear cut lines. You will tend to see no des in just above polite, not necessarily honorific, but more business situations, more formal situations. Ndes can kind of cover almost everything, but no des gives you that extra little bump um, that you'll see. And again, formal, you often see formal writing in, well, formal Japanese in writing when things are written down and not spoken. And so you'll see no des more often in written Japanese. Now, don't forget, when we say written, we're talking about written in a document, written in a book, on web pages, kind of jump back and forth between polite and casual. So I'm going to put those to the side. But, books, reports, documents, anything made by a business and whatnot, you're going to see no des more often. But written does not mean printed in the sense that what you're looking at here on the page, well, you say, well, that's written, that's on a website. That's not written exactly. Written means something that is, a sentence that's put into a kind of a published form of sense. And so you've got the no des, but we see, and in your own usage, you're probably going to use des 90% of the time. But you will see no des from time to time. Now, as I promised, we're going to jump over into a different form. It is the same form, but this is a more, I'm going to say, a canned version of it, where you can just kind of pop this out and use it much more easily. And it is used quite common, but it can have this, a bit of trickiness to it. And it's this ga adding to the end of it. And note that on this page that's right in front of you right now, it's not just ndesu ga, it's ndesu ga with a period. That means that this is almost always a sentence ender. And it is used quite often. I'd say I use this every time I leave the house. Almost every time I leave the house. Because, well, I'll get to that in a second. Okay, first, let's talk about the grammar structure itself. Now you'll notice the structure is exactly the same as ndes because we're still using the same thing. We're just adding the ga to kind of specialize it into a fixed usage. So all the rules we had before is going to be the same. So yes, it could go either way. It could be des, da, sure. And that's if the entire explanation is in past tense. But if you were talking about something that happened in the past and using that as an explanation, you're going to have the past tense before the n. So I don't see n deshita and n datta that often. Because usually you're explaining something in the here and now. You might be explaining something using information from the past. And that means if it's information from the past, I'm typing this out. It's going to be, the past tense is going to be before the n. However, when you're giving an explanation, you're explaining it now. And so I feel like n da and n des are the ones that you're going to hear, more often. And as someone just noted, yeah, you're going to see that past tense form mostly come before the n. But very good question. Okay, so just a few quick examples, and these are exactly the same as before. We just threw a ga on the end, and we changed the words a bit. So we've got a verb at the beginning, tsukatteru n desu ka, muzukashii desu ka, hitsuyou nan desu ka, sushi nan desu ka, but structure is the same. We're just throwing that ga on the end. So, what's going on? Why do we need this? So, this still holds on to that original, this original meaning that we had prior. We're putting it out as an explanation for something else. However, the ga has, and it works together with this. Ga you will often see used at the sentence ending as a way to soften what you just said. It's kind of like you said something, and then the words that came out of your mouth, you grab them with your hands and kind of pull them back a little bit. It's like I have a pet Chihuahua that's only 5 months old, and so she's still, we call her energy puppy. She's just so much energy, and that we have a leash on her when we walk her, and we have to kind of pull back on the leash sometimes because she would just take off otherwise. And the leash, this guy is kind of acting as that leash. So we might want her to get close enough to someone so they can pet her, but we don't want her jumping on them, even though she's, the size of like a potato. She's so small. And so what the ga does is it takes whatever you said and kind of pulls it back a little bit. So it's like I have this, and you see that at this end of a sentence, it's like I have this sentence, but it's got that but feeling to it, where you're like, I have this request, but like I don't really want to say it because it's going to cause you, any request causes an issue from someone else. It takes their time, their energy, their money, whatever. You have a question, but you don't want to bother them. So it's like, I've got a question, but is it okay? Can I ask you? You've got that but that we use in Japanese, and ga takes that same usage. So in Japan, or in Japanese rather, it can be rude to just say, "Hey, I want to ask you something." You're just not that direct in Japanese, and I'd argue that you're often not that direct in English either. Depending on how you speak, it's much easier in Japanese. Just throw that ga on there, but in English, oh, I've got a question if it's okay, or if you've got some time, I'd like to ask you about something. We hedge our requests with other language to, not just drop it on the person and saying, I have a question, and then in parentheses, and I expect you to answer it right now. Most of us don't speak that way. And if you do, also that's fine. But in Japanese, not the greatest thing in the world. So, how can we soften our requests? How can we soften our questions? That's what this ndeska does. Is you will often hear it at the end of the sentence, as I noted, it's kind of a sentence ender, and the request or the invitation or whatever it is you're explaining, you're dropping this out as an explanation. Whatever you're trying to say, oh, this is for this, you often don't actually say that part. You don't ask the question. You give an explanation and then the question is implied. So you're thinking, what's going on? So let's look at some actual examples and you'll see how this works out. So let's look at the first one. You know, if you were to read this, 今そのコンピューターを使ってるんですか? So why might you say this? This sounds like maybe at school or at business or a place where there's shared computers. And, you know, you're using a computer. Maybe you got up to get some coffee, or just you got up for whatever reason. And you come back and someone's about to sit down. And you want to tell them, you want them to not use your computer, but you don't want to tell them, hey, get away from my computer. I'm using that. You know, in English, we might say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I'm still using that." We might actually apologize with the sorry. But in Japanese, we would give the explanation. We would just say, "I'm using that computer right now." Ga, 使ってるんですか? And then we don't say, "Please don't use it," and "Please don't sit there." But given the context of when you say that plus the sentence, it's very clear that you are kindly asking the other person to not use that computer. But you don't actually say it. Here's another one. This one I'd say is probably more common between the two. This is, you know, if you say this, oh, let me say it first. この問題は難しいんですか? So what could come after this? So you're giving the explanation, you're saying, oh, this problem is difficult. Mondai, don't forget, mondai can be problem in the general sense of like I have a problem. It can also mean question. It might be a question on like a sheet if you're in school or whatnot. And so, you know, if you say this, there's that dot dot dot. You're not actually asking the request. You are giving the information for the request, and the request could be, this is saying that you're not saying that you'd like some help with it. You might actually be saying that, but might not. You could also be saying you just need some more time. Someone might say, you might, someone's looking at you, your boss or the teacher is like, so you're done? you know, I'm about to leave. Are you done? And you're like, well, this is hard. So dot dot dot. I'd like some more time, please. There's that implied request in there. But instead of saying, give me more time, this problem is hard, which is very direct and in your face, you are hinting at it by giving the explanation without giving the request. No, it's usually not. I mean, sometimes. The thing is, when you say that, this is spoken Japanese. Like you wouldn't need to give because you're asking a request, and you don't usually ask requests in written form. If that makes sense. Um, it's most often in a spoken context, and so because of that, in dialogue, see, but that's the thing. That's not written. That's printed text for the purpose of capturing a dialogue. So you might see dot dot dot. I can't say that yes, you absolutely will or won't, but I think you might see it like that. That's a good question. So let's jump on to a few more, and then I'm going to give you some of my favorite usages because, like I said, I use these all the time. Now, this one is something you might hear if someone brings a package to your door. And it happens all the time. And depending on the type of package, they might need your signature. And instead of saying, now they might still say this, depending on the person, their personality, their job requirements. I've had people that will say, the post office over here in Japan, they'll come over and say, oh, please sign here. And I think this is when they're at your front door. It feels like there's a bit more casualness because it's not as formal as like a business that you've walked into. Um, but they might still say this. They might say, パッケージをもらうためにサインが必要ですか? Sorry, サインが必要なんですか? I dropped the na. 必要なんですか? But they don't ask you to sign it. It's implied, and you're definitely going to sign this, but they're not actually saying it. They're just giving you the explanation as to why. And to give you a different example, when you're in Japan, I feel like it's less and less, but you still need your hanko, your seal, your ink stamp. You still need that from time to time, especially if you're at a bank. And so they might say something like this. And those first kanji, that's inkan, which is the stamp. And so they might say, oh, so a stamp is required here, your hanko is required here. And they might not say, do you have it? Because that's kind of direct. Did you bring it? I'm asking you, did you bring the thing you need? Otherwise, we can't do this anymore. They're not going to say that. They're just going to gently say, so we need this here, dot, dot, dot. And, it's implied that, oh, do you have it? If so, please get it out. This last one is interesting. This one, you might be saying this, you don't, there are ways to say in Japanese, oh, please eat, please enjoy when they're sitting at the table. But perhaps this is someone that you are not sure what their tastes are. And you made something, but you're not sure if they're okay with it, or if they'll be able to eat it, or if they have an allergy or something. And so you might say, 今日の昼ご飯は寿司なんですか? And then, so what's the part that they're not saying? They might say, it might be this. The unspoken part might be this. 大丈夫でしょうか? So today's lunch is sushi ga. So inside that ga, we have this whole request. Is that okay? Are you all right with that? Is there a problem? But instead of putting them on the spot, with a direct question, just the explanation. So it's very nice. I really like this, both because you can use this and chop off the actual request that you're having, but also don't discount the softener. This is the leash, the lead. Sorry, I'm not sure if I said lead or leash. You call them rido in Japanese, but I know it's leash in English. And when you live here long enough, the loan words and the English, they all mix together. It's like, wait, is lead English or is it Japanese? Or I'm not sure. Okay. The thing I use almost every day when I leave the house is if I'm going to a store or something, and I need to ask someone something, instead of walking up to an employee and just saying, hey, where is this? You might say this. 質問があるんですか? I have a question. But you're not even asking the question yet. Now, I would follow this up with the question, of course, because they don't know what the question is. However, this is a good way of softening your request. Instead of saying, hey, where's this? You're saying, I have a question. Here's my question. It might be something like this. This is something I might say when I'm, for example, talking to a teacher at school, maybe about my children, a problem they have, or a concern or something. So one sec, let me type it out for you. So this one, let me read it for you. 相談したいことがあるんですが. So there's something I'd like to discuss, consult with you about, talk about. And again, I'm softening in it. I'm still fully expecting them to consult with me, to talk with me. So it's not that the pulling back on it with the ga is giving them a chance to get out. No, I still expect them to do it. It's just I'm softening the request. And again, I'm using the ndes to say this is the explanation for me asking the question. Now you might say, well, that's obvious. Like, I'm going to ask a question because I have a question. Why do you say that? It seems repetitive a bit, but it just softens it up. It softens up, it gives them a bit of time to kind of prepare their brain instead of saying, hey, so my son's failing class. What do I do? You know, that's just dropping a load of bricks on them. But if you say, so I would like to talk about my son, dot dot dot, then they can start to prepare. Even a few seconds can mean a lot, both mentally and in the social expectations inside of the conversation. So that is nda, and there's a lot more to it, and you're gonna start once you have in your head, you're gonna start to see it everywhere because it is absolutely everywhere. Um, and so you even see it, for example, like this. You even see it in really short sentences like this. Sonanda. And you see that all the time. And now you're saying, "Oh yeah, I've seen that before." And those are, they're saying whatever that conversation got ripped out of. They're responding to what someone else said, and they're like, "Yeah, that's why. That's the explanation for whatever thing I did, or thing I believe, or thing I said, whatever it happens to be." But you see it all the time. So again, hopefully this lesson takes you from wherever you were before to a step closer to understanding. If you fully understand it and you're like, I can use this 100% now, I'd probably say, wait a second, you probably don't. So don't underestimate, how difficult this can be to use, but know that you are getting closer, and you will get there, definitely. And yes, these video lessons are yeah, and that's a good example. Yeah, I was talking about Inkondo, and I don't have a my number card. Um so I always have to respond no to that. But yeah, the videos are available, and I'll show you where to get to them after the lesson. But anyway, yes, you do see this all the time, and start looking out for it, and start thinking, What is this sentence explaining? They put this out for a reason. Why did they say this? What's this preparing me for? What's this justifying? What's it explaining? Is it positive, negative, past, present, future? Doesn't matter. It's everywhere. So I hope this helped, and I hope you will join us next week. お疲れ様です。